Hi there everybody, welcome back up here into the loft to Weir Yard, and today I've been sent over some figures from a company called Hobbies. These are a little bit different from what you might find in the model shop. These are 3D printed, and I've always said 3D printing is pretty much the future in more ways than one, not just for our hobby. Think of these as Star Trek's replicator technology. This is where it all begins. But for our purposes, it does mean that there's some really good variety of models which wouldn't necessarily otherwise see the light of day. So a big thanks to Hobbies for sending these over. And stick with me and let's take a closer look at what we got here. We can see here one of the figures as it arrived, and they come on a card back with the catalogue number, and on the back we've got a little bit of details about how to get them off the sprues and details of the website. If you go over to the website, there's quite an extensive how-to guide for finishing these off. They come unpainted, so the hobbyist does have to do a little bit of work, but that also means that you can individualise these with the paint finish, so there's a lot of scope there. Now this particular one is, it looks odd as they appear on the backing. This is a limitation of how they have to be printed. Obviously you can't just print in thin air, so they get printed onto this base as you see, and they're probably orientated in the 3D printed this way up, and once we get him off that backing and fully painted, he'll be this way up, leaning over, and it's one of the crew. So these, I believe, are 3D scanned from real people wearing real outfits. So somewhere there's somebody who this is a perfect match to, but he's going to look great on the footplate of, I think these are specifically intended for the Peckett B2. So I'd be really interested to actually get him in there. More than suitable for a number of other locomotives too. Maybe my Terrier too will get itself a footplate crew. There's certainly plenty of locomotives in my fleet that would benefit from a little bit of an addition, so I'm going to be having no problems finding a home for these. Now, I think it's probably easiest to try and paint these with this support, so I'll leave that in place on some of these so I can paint him, rest him on that, and then once the paint is dry I can take off this little bit of a flat piece and then just touch up on his back where those spigots have been. Now I was also sent some of the other figures too, and I've just started out. Here's another footplate crew. I've got him out of the packet, and you can see on his back the marks. I've trimmed away some of those supports. You can just see the marks there on his back. They'll disappear once the painting's done. The models themselves, when they're printed for full support, they need a few extra spigots just to hold them in place, stop them from deforming. Those actually aren't necessary for supporting it whilst painting him, so I've removed quite a few. It just makes it a little bit easier to get full access. And then again, I'll just remove those final two from the backing when it comes to finishing him off. So let's put him to one side. I have also been having a look at, I got sent some deer, and this actually highlights some of the risks with the material involved. It's very difficult to focus on this, so do excuse my nails. I've been hard at work. This was actually a male deer. Is that a buck? I think it's a buck. And when I've come to remove him from the backing, the part of the head snapped off, the antlers. They can be quite delicate, so do be very much aware of that. That's probably more down to the fact that the knife that I've been using to separate them is a little bit on the blunt side. And this, the plastic does seem to have almost a slightly hard but brittle edge. It reminds me a little bit of very hard toffee, the way it splits. So do be careful, very careful, when removing some of these spigots. I've got here a few more of the deer. That's another male deer buck. Certainly with the antlers. Gosh, yeah, I should have paid more attention, I think, in biology. But you can see there how fine the antlers are. And it's a really great model. Now, I did try and keep these onto the spigot, but the little spigots with the flat platform that they came on was very brittle and actually came off a little bit easier than I was hoping. So it's not to worry. It should still be perfectly easy to paint these. So I'm going to be working through and having a go at those. There's another deer here. Again, this was a female deer, a deer, a female deer. And that came off the spigots as well quite readily. You can see here as one of the deer still on its base. And you can see there's quite a lot of support on that. I'm going to actually leave that one be because that's the underside. And I can get away without needing to paint that. So just to make my life easier, I'm going to leave that on the sprue. And going to be painting them up. I will look online. It's always good to check online for some images, just so you know what you're trying to kind of copy when you come to paint them. Otherwise, you'll end up with an animal that doesn't quite look right. So all I've got available are Humbrol enamel paints. It does recommend acrylics, but I don't actually have any acrylics to hand. I don't normally paint things like figures, so I'm going to see how well I do with the Humbrol enamels, but with whatever finish I get, do bear in mind that the website does recommend acrylic paints for these. Now, it's certainly a case that you probably benefit from washing these as the same as really any plastic kit. There can be a little bit of residue on the plastic as a result of, in the case of injection moulding, something to stop it sticking to the moulds. But I'm not quite sure with this plastic, because it is sort of extruded by a printer, whether that's absolutely necessary. But just to be on the safe side, it probably won't hurt at all. Other things that they've sent over, there's actually quite an extensive range, and this one really intrigued me. There's Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and does he have a cigar? Yeah, he even has, you just see there, he's got a cigar. So I'm going to, when I come to paint him, I'm going to have to be ever so careful. The detail on these models is fabulous, and like I said before, these are all scanned from actual people wearing actual costumes, so they are 100% accurate, and that is really, really nicely done. So, as per any figure really, but certainly these with this really deep sense of detail, the more time you're willing to spend on painting them, then the better result you're going to get. But really, the only limitation is your painting skills rather than the model itself. From what I've seen there, this is really, really nice. Now, one of the things I might suggest is that it's probably not something that you normally hear recommended by a railway modeller, but Games Workshop have a really good range of paints that I've seen that do really good highlights and lowlights, and these figures, it strikes me, are really good candidates for products such as that, and you get a really, really good result. So it may be worth considering, if painting figures is your thing, to head on over and check out their range to really complement the quality of these models. Now, it has to be said, I'm not normally used to painting figures. We've got a Women's Royal Army Corps there. That'll go pretty well in the corner military establishment on Weir Yard, so really looking forward to getting her painted up. And let's see who we've got here. Another locomotive crew member. There's certainly a really good range, ranging from military personnel, historical personnel, animals, and it's an ever-expanding range, so always worth, if you don't see what you want, maybe make an inquiry to them, and it may be something that they're going to be adding to the range. So I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm going to look to paint some of these. Some of these I'm going to leave be for the time being, and as I said before, quick proviso, I'm not normally a person who does a lot of figure painting, so I'm sure that you will get a much better finish than I do, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to see what effects I can have with Humbrol enamels, and of course acrylics are recommended as the best paints for the job, but I don't have any to hand, so just to give a sense of how these are going to merge with the landscape when done, I'm going to want to paint these up with what I've got available. So I've picked out a few colours that I'm going to consider using, and I've got this sort of olive drab. If I get to the WRAC uniform, Women's Royal Army Corps, I'm going to be using that. I've got this flesh colour, which is matte number, I'm just trying to read that actually, 61, something like that. So that's going to be for exposed skin. It does look a bit on the pink side. I might investigate what other colours that I've got going on. And then for the overalls of the footplate crew, did pick out this number 109. I'm not actually entirely sure of that. I've also got RAF blue. That might be a bit on the dark side, so I'll have a look into that. Matte 110, which is actually matte natural wood is what it's billed as. And I'm thinking that for the deer, that might actually be about the right colour. I've also got matte 29 as an alternative for that. And then going back to the footplate crew, matte 34 for any white shirts. So just obviously don't want it shiny. People's clothes don't shine, not unless you're wearing some kind of PVC jumpsuit. So always as well, stick to matte when you're painting anything in these scales. Satin, if you need anything that in real life would be gloss, I always think satin is the best. But for doing these figures, I'm sticking to all matte finish stuff. So I've got my the rest of my paints over here. So I might have a rummage through, see if there's any other colours that might suit for the sort of overalls of the footplate crew. There's quite a few different bits and pieces in here. Other browns, which I might be able to use for the deer. But certainly there's a lot going on in there, so I'm going to investigate. I'm not going to try and paint all these figures, just get a suggestion. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done, see how they come out. So I've just finished doing some painting here, and you can see the figures just laid out to dry. That mess of black at the feet of the Women's Royal Army Corps lady is really just me attempting to paint her shoes. I wouldn't worry about that. I actually superglued her to one of the offcuts from it's actually from the deer, and that was just to make it a little bit easier to paint her without rubbing off some of the finer detail. So, I'm not sure how much detail you can actually see on there. I'm just going to turn around. You can see the glisten from the paint still being wet. It's actually really difficult, I find, to paint the little figures. My eyesight's not what it used to be, but actually the way that these figures come on these bases is actually probably about as easy as it gets to paint figures, so that's a really big plus point. I know that these little sprues that they're on are probably more to do with how they're actually having to be made, but they're a useful addition to be left on in the packet, so I give it a big plus for that, because painting of these things is never the easiest, but actually that does make the job a whole lot easier. Over here to the deer, you can see I've got the antlers painted on that one. The one where the antlers came off, it's not too bad. It's disguised a bit. It's changed gender. It's gone from being a buck to a doe, which isn't really a great big deal. I'm sure that the one remaining male deer will be more than happy with having an extra concubine in his clan. But I'm going to leave these to dry now, and then tomorrow I'm going to get these off the remainder of the sprue that they come on, touch up any bits where necessary, and then it'll be a case of giving them a quick weathering. And the whole purpose of the weathering is it really does bring out and accentuate the detailing. It's kind of a highlight and low lighting of these using a weathering wash. So stick with me, and we're going to do that first thing in the morning. But to you, that'll be just like that. Back again this morning. I've left the paint to dry. I've just separated the Women's Royal Army Corps person there from the base, and it's turned out really nice actually. You do need some very fine paintbrushes. You can see there I've painted her hair in, and one of the other things to remember with this, you might think, why haven't you painted her handbag? Well actually, I do believe the handbags were part of the uniform, so they were exactly the same material. So that's the way I'm going to leave that. The deer have come out quite nice. They need a colour wash over them just to mute down that brown. And again, I need to separate the crews from the backing pieces, which I can do now that it's all dried. And then I'll just touch up where any of those sprues went with a little wee dab of paint. And then it's just on to posing them on the layout. So I'm going to crack on with that. And let's check back in once I've got that done. One of the things that I do find though is when you're separating it, you can see there the way that the plastic breaks. It can be a little bit brittle. It's very hard, but brittle. So you've got to be ever so careful. So he's going to have a big chunk taken out of his bottom. Paint should disguise that, but it's something you really do have to watch out with these, more so than with an injection moulded figure. Other than that, just need to clean up his hat. We'll give him a quick touch up with paint, and he should be ready and willing to get inside a locomotive. It looks like he should be pushing a shopping cart actually. I'm looking at that. And it's like, oh, let's go around the supermarket. Oh, look, beans. Oh, I love beans, me. Oh dear, I've had too much sugar, but there we are. He's looking pretty good there. So I'm going to continue cleaning this guy up, and then we'll get them all together and do a quick colour wash and start posing them in place. I've done a colour wash on these now, and this really brings out the detail. This is something that, to be honest, works well with any kind of figures. And what it does is it just accumulates in all of the crevices, things like that, and then you get a kind of highlight and low light effect. Now you don't want to do it too much, otherwise they look weird because you've got too much dirt on them. But it helps break up the flatness of the actual colours that you're using as the base coat. So I'm quite pleased with what we got here. I'm going to go ahead, fit these on the layout. I'm going to get some final shots just to see how well they look contained within the landscape. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with these. There's a good range that comes from Hardy's Hobbies, and it's a variety of different prototypes that aren't available through any of the main ranges. So even down to things like these crews, locomotive crews, they're all in very different poses to what you'd find from other manufacturers. So these complement rather than compete with anything else that's on the market. The quality of the models as reproduced is really, really nice. And like I said before, if there's anything that you'd really, really want, then do contact them. And I'm sure if there's enough demand that they would be more than happy to add to their range. Now, I haven't painted up Isambard, Kingdom Brunel, but certainly it just goes to show that no matter what period you model, Hardy's Hobbies has something for you. In terms of finesse of the models themselves, it's certainly a brilliant 9 out of 10. Ease of painting, again, I encountered no problems whatsoever. Whilst they do recommend acrylic paints, I used Humbrol enamels with no ill effect. So, again, 9.5 out of 10. The only detraction that really I found was that the material that they're printed out of can be prone to cracking if you put pressure on them in the wrong direction, especially when you're separating them from the sprue. But this wasn't a major detraction for me, but it was there. So in terms of durability of the actual figures, I'd say 8 out of 10. And in terms of the range available, it's 10 out of 10. It's not competing directly with any other manufacturers, and it certainly complements and gives you a real good range of animals, people, all sorts of stuff that you can add to your layout. So overall, I'm quite happy to give, I'd say, a good solid 9 out of 10 for these. Now, I'm not a person who would normally go out their way to paint figures. I'm probably one of the people who's a little bit lazy I just buy stuff ready painted. But having given these a go, I can say it's actually pretty easy. And even somebody who's a bit of a klutz like me at finesse of painting stuff did a really reasonable effort, I would say. And I'm really pleased with the results. One thing that I would say to you is that you need to get yourself some very fine paintbrushes. It's really something that if you want to get the fine detail in, you need some really, really fine paintbrushes. I struggled a little bit because the smallest brushes that I had were probably a little bit on the big side, but I was able to make it work for me. So overall, I'm really pleased with these figures that have been kindly sent through for review from Hardy's Hobbies. Would I buy them myself? Yes, certainly I would. There's nothing that really put me off these. I think they're a great, solid product, filling a little niche in the market. And certainly I'm looking forward to getting these fitted into locomotives, adding them to my military establishment for the WRAC lady, and also some of these on the hillside just really does add to the level of detail on a model railway, where the more you view, the more you look deeper into a model, the more you get back out of it. So I'm really pleased with these. The individual poses of these figures really do mean that they come to life when added to a locomotive. So we've got the Hornby Peckett B2, one of the figures there, just waxing lyrical, leaning on the side of the cab. It really does look true to life. And that, I think, is where these figures really come into their own. There's a lot of thought gone into the natural poses that human beings get into when they're just going about their day. And that looks almost magical in there. And it makes a great locomotive so much better. Moving on to the Hutton's Andrew Barclay. We've got another one of the figures in there. Again, bringing this wonderful locomotive to life. Finally, the third figure fits just perfectly well inside the cab of this Peckett W4. And between the three of these, I've got some great poses, and it just adds that magic to these locomotives. It's a little bit harder to see the WRAC figure that we've got in there. She's just over here. If I just avoid casting a shadow, you can see her in the background. And compared to these Pico figures, well, it's tremendously good value for money when you compare price-wise, I guess, and you get some variety in there. So I'm really pleased to be able to add an army contingent to, well, at least the Women's Royal Army Corps contingent into my establishment. Not really quite decided what it's going to be, but certainly any military personnel in there just adds to the interest going on. The deer I just love. They just fit in there almost really quite subtly into the landscape of this hillside. And then up here, standing proud, the stag on this little bluff outcrop. And if I just draw back from this scene, you'll be able to see, hopefully, just how subtle it is, but that it adds that extra depth to the model and gives you something that you can look at and look deeper and deeper into the model. And I just love stuff like that. Well, I hope that's been informative to you. Don't forget to like this video and share it too, and also subscribe to the channel, and you'll be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. And a big thanks to Hardy's Hobbies for sending over these review samples for me to take a closer look at. Until next time, you take really good care of yourself. It's been great to have your company. I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Today's video has been brought to you in part thanks to the generous donation of my fans on Patreon. And an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Bob Threeton, Alec Ralph, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, and oorail.co.uk. If you'd like to help support the show, head on over to patreon.com/Jennifer Kirk. Thank you. Today's video has been brought to you by my books, Bringing Home the Stars, Twinkle Little Star, and also you can get the complete comic collections of All Over the House, Books 1, Books 2, and also the wacky zany Life of Knobty Mouse. Thanks, and catch you later.